I don't quite remember the first time I ever read Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery, but I do vividly remember reading a version that had these beautiful illustrated pictures in elementary school. I was instantly drawn to this loud, passionate, stubborn, red-headed orphan girl who reminded me a lot of myself, minus the red hair and the orphan part. I have always been an extremely passionate, outspoken, sometimes stubborn person, and while there has recently been more media and literature depicting women and girls possessing these traits, Anne of Green Gables is revolutionary in the way that it depicts its main character. I apologize if any of the angles or anything like that in this video make you frustrated. I totally get it. Obviously I filmed this over the course of 2 days. My outfit's changed, or my apartment is kind of slanted, so it's hard to be centered in this, and also I have a weird setup going on right now because I don't quite have a great place to film. And also I apologize if you see me looking forward and it looks really weird. It's because my computer is currently holding up my phone, which is recording, and my script is on my computer, and so that's what I'm reading off of. So if it just looks like I'm looking somewhere weird and I look weird, I'm looking at my script. I sincerely apologize though, because I know that these things can be frustrating, and I just wanted to jump in and tell you guys that that's what's going on there. Anne of Green Gables was written by L.M. Lucy Maud Montgomery in 1908, and for this time, the main character, Anne Shirley, was very much against the norm of how young girls were supposed to behave.
Rude, impolite, unfeeling woman, and I hate you!
She is in direct contrast with the ideal meek and ladylike tropes. We see those attributed to her friends throughout the book. However, this book was originally written in the 20th century, and some aspects of it are quite dated in the now 21st century, which has led to the debate on whether or not Anne of Green Gables is feminist. In today's video essay, I will be attempting to find an answer to this debate, although there truly is no right answer to such a question. My name is Ella Orchard-Blowen, and thank you for joining me on this exploration of feminist literature. As you can see today, I am channeling Anne of Green Gables, cottagecore, all of that. This book means a lot to me. I got this pretty edition of it on my birthday this year, when I turned 21. Edition of Anne of Green Gables and a pretty edition of Peter Pan. For Christmas, I got a pretty edition of Little Women. You can see Peter Pan and Little Women right there. That's literally irrelevant, but these are just some fun little facts I want to put out there. Anne with an E is one of my favorite shows of all time. Just Anne of Green Gables means a lot to me. What exactly makes something feminist? How can we determine whether or not media and or literature is feminist? These are some of the questions that lingered in the back of my mind when I was researching whether or not Anne of Green Gables is feminist. I think the first step is to define what makes something feminist. I'm going to pull the classic trope and quote Merriam-Webster, the dictionary. Define feminism as belief in and advocacy of the political, economic, and social equality of the sexes, expressed especially through organized activity on behalf of women's rights and interests. Feminism has undergone many movements and waves throughout the world, with first wave feminism occurring during the 19th and 20th centuries. The main focus of first wave feminism was women's suffrage, aka earning the right to vote, along with abolition. There was a lot of racism within the first wave of feminism, with many women not able to vote not only because of their gender, but because of their race and or their class. I could go into a whole deep dive of each wave of feminism, but I'll save that for a different video essay. Second wave feminism occurred during the 1960s and 70s and focused on reproductive rights, domestic violence, rape, and workplace issues. Third wave feminism started in the 1990s and ended around 2012. This wave focused on diversity and individualism. Third wave feminism is when feminism truly started to become intersectional. Finally, fourth wave feminism began in 2012 and is the current wave. This wave focuses on using technology to empower people, specifically women, and also obviously on intersectionality. Movements like Me Too is key in fourth wave feminism. Again, I'm giving a very basic overview of these waves of feminism. I highly encourage you to research these waves further. There are things to criticize and praise in all of these waves of feminism, but it's important to acknowledge that without these previous waves, we would not be where we are now. Now that I have thoroughly, or at least attempted to, define feminism, I think it's important to define feminist theory. When analyzing literature and media, we employ literary theory. As defined in the book Literary Theory, a very short introduction by Jonathan Culler, literary theory is the systematic account of the nature of literature and of the methods for analyzing it. Feminist theory is a branch of literary theory, where literature is examined from a feminist lens. To quote Culler again, feminist theorists champion the identity of women, demand rights for women, and promote women's writings as representations of the experience of women. I don't necessarily love Culler's definition of feminist theory because it focuses very much on the opposition between men and women, which for the time when this was reissued, 2011, is what many believe feminism to be. It's not very intersectional, and it's really only about women getting equal rights and not all people having equal rights. I prefer Joanne Arinder's definition of feminist theory. Feminist theory falls under the umbrella of critical theory, which in general has the purpose of destabilizing systems of power and oppression. It is now highly understood that feminism is intersectional and feminists advocate for equal rights for all people. This view of feminism is exhibited in Arider's full definition of feminist theory. The purpose of using a feminist lens is to enable the discovery of how people interact within systems and possibly offer solutions to confront and eradicate oppressive systems and structures. Feminist theory considers the lived experience of any person/people, not just women, with an emphasis on oppression. My breed of feminist theory is examining the way that gender and gender roles play out in literature or media. For example, does this character question traditional gender norms? Or does our preconceived notions of gender roles impact how we view a character? Analyzing the way gender plays out in literature is not an easy task to take on, and there truly is no right or wrong answers to the questions that I pose in this video. I simply intend to look at the way that gender plays out in Anne of Green Gables from a feminist theory lens. Before diving into the book, I think it's important to discuss the background. Anne of Green Gables was written by L.M. Montgomery in 1908. The book has been considered a classic children's book and has sold over 50 million copies. There are many sequels, prequels, and media centered around the book. In this video essay, I will be mainly focusing on the first book. However, I will make references to the prequels and sequels and the TV shows, movies, all of that. The first book is set in the late 19th century and tells the story of Anne Shirley, an 11-year-old orphan girl. Anne is accidentally adopted by siblings Marilla and Matthew Cuthbert.
It's a girl.
I can see that. Where's the boy?
There weren't any.
Who were meant to adopt a boy to help them on their farm. Anne moves to Avonlea, a fictional town in Prince Edward Island in Canada. L.M. Montgomery was from Canada. That's why the series is set in Canada. Throughout the first book, Anne adjusts to her new life in Avonlea, along with attempting to fit into the society of her town. From the very beginning of the book, gender plays an extremely important role. Marilla and Matthew both express their desire for a boy orphan in the start of the novel. Marilla explains why they specifically want a boy to Rachel Lynde in the first chapter of the book. We thought we'd get a boy. Matthew's getting up in years, he's 60 and he isn't so spry as he once was. His heart troubles him a good deal, and you know how desperate hard it's got to be to get hired help. This immediate emphasis on gender sets up the rest of the book. Anne was not initially wanted by Marilla and Matthew, something that is consistently repeated throughout the book. But why did Marilla and Matthew specifically only want a boy? Julia McQuillan and Julie Pfeiffer discuss how gender plays out in Anne of Green Gables in their article, Why Anne Makes Us Dizzy, reading Anne of Green Gables from a gender perspective. McQuillan and Pfeiffer discuss why Marilla and Matthew put such an importance on adopting a boy. Marilla and Matthew specify a boy because they need a good worker. Why then do they not specify a good, strong, healthy child capable of doing farm work? They further go on to discuss how boys were perceived as being harder workers than girls at this time because of traditional gender roles. So when Marilla and Matthew ultimately end up with Anne, they are extremely disappointed to have received a girl. Because Anne isn't a boy, that automatically makes her unable to be a good worker. Anne not being a boy makes her feel unwanted throughout the book, something she calls out repeatedly.
Don't want me? You don't want me because I'm not a boy?
You don't want me, she cried. You don't want me because I'm not a boy. Viewing this from a feminist theory lens, it is extremely clear to see how gender impacts Anne's character. If Anne were to simply have just been a boy, then she would have been wanted by the Cuthberts, but because she just had the misfortune of being born a girl, she is not wanted. This phenomenon of women/girls not being wanted in favor of men/boys is a common theme in media and literature. This ideology doesn't account for those that fall outside the norms of the gender binary. However, the mindset that there is only two genders has long persisted. The understanding that gender and sex don't fit within only two categories has slowly become more mainstream within recent years. Obviously, I know that there isn't just two, that gender is a social construct. The characters in this book would not have the ability to recognize that a person could possess traits pertaining to both of the traditional gender roles. As McQuillan and Pfeiffer say, Marilla assumes that there are two distinct categories, male and female, and that the categories are internally homogeneous and non-overlapping. Marilla and Matthew ultimately decide to keep Anne when they slowly start to realize her worth. Marilla looked at Anne and suffered at sight of the child's pale face with its look of mute misery, the misery of a helpless little creature who finds itself once more caught in the trap from which it had escaped. Cuthberts decide to keep her. However, that doesn't mean that they fully accept Anne for who she is. Marilla especially tries to make Anne conform. In the eyes of her community, Anne does not fit within the traditional mold of a girl for the time.
Sit down.
She is extremely loud, stubborn, and speaks her mind with little to no concern for how it will impact those around her.
I hate you, I hate you, I hate you! How dare you call me skinny and ugly? How dare you call me freckled and redheaded?
Anne sticks out among her peers because of her inability to be like the other girls in Avonlea. To quote Quillen and Pfeiffer again, Anne herself repeatedly asserts her desire to be like other girls. She puts flowers on her hat, longs for puffed sleeves, yet, ironically enough, this desire to fit in simply emphasizes her difference. Anne desperately wants to fit in with her peers, specifically the girls in her class, but she just can't seem to fit in with them no matter how hard she tries. She doesn't have the right dresses, her hair stands out. Despite her best efforts,
It is a scrumptious pleasure to make your acquaintances, and I shall do my utmost to prove myself worthy of your friendship.
She just can't conform. She found a crowd of little girls, all more or less gaily attired, in whites and blues and pinks, and all staring with curious eyes at this stranger in their midst. And instead of encouraging her to embrace who she truly is and not care about what others think of her, Marilla, her now adopted mother, tries to make Anne conform. All I want is that you should behave like other little girls and not make yourself ridiculous. To be fair, I don't believe Marilla wants Anne to conform in a malicious way. I more so think she wants Anne to not be bullied and ridiculed by the town of Avonlea. Marilla is a very complex character, and there's so much to unpack with both her and Matthew's characters. But at the end of the day, truly only want what's best for Anne, and unfortunately for this time, conforming to society's expectations is the way to succeed in life. Anne also feels this impulse to conform to society's expectations, especially with her classmates. Marilla sets up a playdate of sorts with Mrs. Barry and her daughter Diana, in hopes that Diana will be a good influence on Anne. Anne at this point in the book is desperate for a friendship, especially with another young girl in Avonlea. When Diana and Anne do finally meet each other, they become best friends pretty quickly.
Finger around mine. I'll repeat the oath first. I solemnly swear to be faithful to my bosom friend Diana Barry for as long as the sun and moon shall endure.
Despite the fact that Anna very much does conform to society's expectations of how a young lady should behave, she immediately accepts Anne for who she is. You're a queer girl, Anne. I heard before that you were queer, but I believe I'm going to like you real well. Anne and Diana go on to have a beautiful friendship that spans throughout all of the books. I think their friendship is a beautiful representation of women friendships because they both accept each other fully for who they are. Marilla at first seems not equipped for motherhood, or for mothering Anne. However, when truly examining the book, it is clear that Marilla is pretty well equipped for mothering Anne. As Lauren Hinshaw explains in the article, The Acceptance of Womanhood, Gender Performance and Self-Actualization in L.M. Montgomery's Anne of Green Gables, Anne of Avonlea, and Anne of the Island, in some respects, Marilla is uniquely suited to the role of Anne's mother because of her own existence outside of the larger community of practice of Avonlea. However, Marilla is not an outsider in the same sense that Anne was. Rather, her relation to society is that of someone who was brought up with all the expectations of her role as a woman within the exterior community, but failed to fulfill those expectations and returned to the predominantly interior existence. The pressure that Marilla puts on Anne to conform to traditional gender roles partially comes from a place of understanding, because Marilla doesn't particularly conform to gender roles.
So without a husband, I may as well be considered an invalid.
She only wants what's best for Anne, and in this way I think Marilla is kind of a feminist. Marilla also stands up for Anne repeatedly throughout the book to those who insult Anne or suggest that she should change. She's never been taught what is right, and you were too hard on her, Rachel. As the book goes on, Marilla learns to accept Anne more and more. Not only does Marilla learn to accept Anne, but she also learns more about herself as well. Maria Verconaz explores all of the complexities of gender in Anne of Green Gables in the article Complex Anne Anger, a third-wave feminist rereading of Anne of Green Gables. Verconez discusses how motherhood plays an extremely important role throughout the book, especially in regards to Marilla. Marilla is shown to reflect her own thoughts about raising a child, her own mothering, and the contradiction of her emotions when Anne misbehaves, gets into scraps, or acts against social norms. In fact, Marilla struggles with and also reflects on her mothering quite a lot throughout the novel. Through the character of Marilla, Montgomery shows how complex motherhood could be, something I would argue is inherently feminist. To quote Verconez again, Mrs. Lynde can be seen to represent the patriarchal institution of motherhood. Marilla represents feminist mothering. Mrs. Rachel Lynde lives very close to Green Gables, the Cuthberts' farm, and Marilla and Rachel have been friends since childhood. Rachel does sometimes serve as a mother figure to Anne, but she is also extremely strict, somewhat of a contrast to Marilla. In my opinion, Marilla is very much a feminist depiction of motherhood. Anne's other parent, Matthew Cuthbert, Marilla's brother, also plays an extremely important role in Anne's life. Matthew is the one who picks Anne up from the train station in the beginning of the story.
Suppose you're Mr. Matthew Cuthbert. My name is Anne Shirley. Anne spelt with me.
Matthew had taken the scrawny little hand in his, and then and there he decided what to do. He could not tell this child with the glowing eyes that there had been a mistake. He would take her home and let Marilla do that. Matthew and Anne do form a very close bond, and Matthew does let Marilla take the lead on a lot of the strict parenting. I would argue that this method of parenting goes against traditional gender roles. Hey guys, it is a different day, that is why I'm dressed a different outfit. I'm still channeling Anne of Green Gables. Check. As I have mentioned before, Anne has a difficult time connecting with her peers because of how different she is compared to them. Diana and her do become kindred spirits. However, the rest of Anne's classmates are wary of her. Marilla even worries about if the other children will be kind to Anne. Anne was such an odd girl. How would she get on with the other children? After befriending Diana, the rest of the girls in Anne's class seem to be more willing to accept her into their group. As most young girls do, Anne seeks out the approval of her peers, especially the girls in her class.
Unmentionable. That's why. That's not a reason. Why don't you ever understand anything?
Ruby Gillis gave me an apple, and Sophie Sloane lent me a lovely pink card with "May I see you home" on it. Lily Bolter let me wear her bead ring all afternoon, and oh Marilla, Jane Andrews told me that Minnie McPherson told her that she heard Prissy Andrews tell Sarah Gillis that I had a very pretty nose. Montgomery beautifully demonstrates what it's like to be a young girl, feeling the pressure to fit in with her peers. And viewing this from a feminist theory lens, I can't help but wonder if Montgomery is potentially pointing out the pressure society puts on young girls to perform their gender correctly. Anne doesn't fit in with the other girls and engage in all these feminine activities with them, then she would continue to be treated like an outcast by her society.
I don't know what you think you were doing walking with Gilbert Blythe. You can't talk to Gilbert Blythe. You can't even look at him. Well, see for yourself. Ruby has liked him for 3 years. She has dibs. There, that nasty girl didn't know any better.
I also want to acknowledge how beautiful and important friendships between young girls/women are to me, and I love to see them portrayed so beautifully, like they are in Anne of Green Gables. However, I do think that the other girls in Anne's class can sometimes negatively impact each other. They enforce gender roles on each other and are easy to turn on each other if one of them doesn't perform gender correctly. Even Anne engages in enforcing gender roles on her friends. To quote Laura Hinshaw again, Anne thus pulls her friends into the same worry over the gendered roles they occupy, and through this form of play demonstrates another source from which children draw their understanding of interpersonal communications and the roles men and women fulfill in a society. This enforcing of gender roles doesn't mean that these characters can't be viewed as feminist. I've also felt the pressure to conform and fall into gender roles and put that pressure on my girl best friends, yet I am still a feminist. Montgomery depicts girlhood in such an honest, revealing way that makes the reader wonder why Anne so desperately wants to fit in with these girls. And this questioning of gender roles is feminist. The girls also put pressure on each other to have crushes on the boys in their class, again reinforcing traditional gender norms, aka being boy crazy. However, Anne does question why there is this obsession over boys. But I do think that writing take notices up on the wall about the boys and girls is the silliest ever. I should just like to see anybody dare to write my name up with a boy. The take notice board is a board on which the kids in Diana and Anne's class will write the names of boys and girls in the class that they think should be a couple.
Notice board with the post about me.
This is so exciting.
Isn't that scandalous?
Scandal will be when folks find out it was you.
You're a sly one, Jane, since I'm sure it was you who put this up. Who else might have seen me strolling home with Billy?
Everyone will know now.
Oh, dear. Then again, I suppose it's a good thing since we should all stake our claim on our paramours.
Very heteronormative. Anne does admit that she secretly kind of wishes that her name would be written on the board, but she also seems to reject the pressure to be boy crazy. One of Anne's friends and classmates, Ruby Gillis, is extremely boy crazy. She especially obsesses over their classmate, Gilbert Blythe. Ruby Gillis says she means to have a beau as soon as she's 15, said Diana. Ruby Gillis thinks of nothing but she's actually delighted when anyone writes her name up in a take notice for all she pretends to be so mad. Anne critiques Ruby's obsession with boys, although this behavior isn't very girl of Anne. Anne looks down on Ruby because Ruby obsesses over what boys think of her, which there is some valid criticism in this. Ruby Gillis thinks of nothing but young men, and the older she gets, the worse she is. It's good to discuss why women/girls constantly feel the need to seek approval of boys/men, but also fourth wave feminism, which is the wave my feminist theory lens is set in, focuses on letting people exist and respecting all people. However, I don't think the fact that Anne judges Ruby for being boy crazy makes Anne not a feminist. Young men are all very well in their place, but it doesn't do to drag them into everything, does it? Diana and I are thinking seriously of promising each other that we will never marry but be nice old maids and live together forever. That's gay. Anne's group of girlfriends are so important in Anne of Green Gables because Anne evolves with these girls, and together they get to experience girlhood together. Each of these girls has their own distinct personality, again something not common in literature at the time. Josie Pye, Anne's frenemy, is extremely bossy and a very strong leader. She can be quite cruel to Anne, but she's actually a quite complex character. Jane Andrews is another one of Anne's friends. She's very prim and follows the rules. She can be quite shy, but she's also a great friend. I've already discussed Ruby Gillis and Diana Barry here. Tilly Boulter is also a great friend to Anne. She's very considerate and kind. Anne has plenty of other classmates with unique personalities, but if I were to dive into each and every single one of them, we would be here forever. If you are well versed in any Anne of Green Gables lore, then you probably know the name Gilbert Blythe. Gilbert is one of Anne's classmates, and the boy that Ruby is obsessed with. Diana first tells Anne about Gilbert one day while they were walking to the schoolhouse together, warning Anne about how smart he is. Anne is quite smart and good at school, another example of Montgomery going against gender norms for the time. Anne is canonically smarter than the boys in her class. Gilbert is also used to all the girls in their class enamored with him, and when Anne isn't instantly obsessed with him, he gets upset. Gilbert Blythe wasn't used to putting himself out to make a girl look at him and meeting with failure. She should look at him. In one of the most iconic scenes from the book, Gilbert pulls on Anne's braid and calls her carrots in an attempt to get her to look at him.
Carrots!
They do look like carrots.
How dare you!
Carrots.
I'm talking to you!
Anne gets enraged and hits him with her slate. From a feminist theory lens, Anne is going against gender norms here, not acting very ladylike. However, when Anne then gets in trouble with their evil teacher, Mr. Phillips, Gilbert stands up for her. It was my fault, Mr. Phillips. I teased her. Gilbert stands up for Anne, which I would argue is very feminist of him. Boys/men aren't traditionally encouraged to take accountability for their actions, so it's quite shocking when Gilbert does. Gilbert also attempts to apologize to Anne. "I'm awfully sorry I made fun of your hair, Anne," he whispered. "Rightly, honest I am. Don't be mad for keeps now." Anne, however, does not accept this apology and refuses to ever forgive him. Eventually, a rivalry starts between the two of them over who can be the best at school. And Montgomery makes clear that in the realm of education, Anne and Gilbert are equals, which I would argue is the very definition of feminism. There was an open rivalry between Gilbert and Anne now. Previously, the rivalry had been rather one-sided, but there was no longer any doubt that Gilbert was as determined to be first in class as Anne was. He was a man worthy of her steel. The other members of the class practically acknowledged their superiority and never dreamed of trying to compete with them. Gilbert and Anne then both take an exam in order to get into the academy for further education. Both pass the exam. "Anne, you've passed," she cried. "Passed the very first. You and Gilbert both. You're ties, but your name is first." They both go off to the academy along with their other friends, and Gilbert and Ruby start to present as a couple. And Anne slowly starts to want to form a friendship with Gilbert. Help thinking, too, that it would be very pleasant to have such a friend as Gilbert to jest and chatter with and exchange ideas about books and studies and ambitions. Gilbert has ambitions, she knew, and Ruby Gillis did not seem the sort of person with whom such could be equitably discussed. Anne is jealous of Ruby and Gilbert's close relationship. However, Anne immediately rejects the notion of having a crush on Gilbert. There was no silly sentiment in Anne's ideas concerning Gilbert. Boys were to her, when she thought about them at all, merely possible good comrades. But then she goes on to acknowledge that Gilbert is attractive. But then he wasn't half as good looking as Gilbert. Sorry to go on and on about Anne and Gilbert. I just personally love them. I also think that this internal struggle that Anne has over Gilbert can be perceived through a feminist lens. Anne rejects any romantic attention from any man because it threatens any possibility she may have to succeed in life without a man. Anne seems extremely wary of all men besides Matthew, preferring the company of her girlfriends. She had a genius for friendships. Girlfriends she had in plenty. Montgomery shows through Anne's feelings on men that it wasn't a necessity for girls/women to have a boy/man in their lives. Again, a fundamental feminist idea. Eventually, Anne decides to become friends with Gilbert after he gives up his spot for her to continue her education. "We are going to be the best of friends," said Gilbert. "We were born to be friends, Anne. You've thwarted destiny enough. I know we can help each other in many ways. You're going to keep up your studies, aren't you? So am I. Come, I'm going to walk home with you." Gilbert again is showing his support for Anne, mentioning that they both have things to offer each other. They can both support each other, which is extremely feminist to me. A relationship should be a partnership, with both partners supporting each other. For the time this was written, this kind of equal partnership relationship was revolutionary. However, Gilbert and Anne of Green Gables as just friends. Nothing romantic yet. And as Lauren Hinshaw wrote in her article, Anne only accepts Gilbert's friendship when there is no hint of romance, real or imaginary, present in the exchange. When he gives up the Avonlea school for her to remain close to Marilla, she has not given up on the idea of romance altogether, for in the safety of her imagination. Anne has no trouble acting out and even enjoying romance, but in the real world of Avonlea, her continued refusal of such attention indicates how she remains at war with herself. Eventually, in the sequels, Anne and Gilbert's relationship does turn romantic, with the two of them getting married and having kids together. However, it is not without the two of them first developing a strong friendship, again, something not typical for romantic relationships at the time. Gilbert genuinely admires Anne and considers her his equal, making him, in my opinion, very feminist. I apologize for how much I've been yapping. I could go on and on about Anne of Green Gables. I could go on and on about Anne of Green Gables and feminist theory. But since this script is literally at 15 pages, it's actually at like 17. I'm going to attempt to conclude this video. So, is Anne of Green Gables feminist? I would argue that feminist. There are parts of this book that are quite dated, and I would not define this feminism as intersectional. However, it cannot be denied that Montgomery was quite revolutionary with how she wrote Anne Shirley. Anne of Green Gables shows us how much gender roles can deeply impact the ways that we grow up, and also how important it is to embrace who you are. The quote on the back of this book really defines this for me. I don't know what lies around the bend, but I'm going to believe that the best does. This is a book about growing up and about girlhood, and it does inherently question and challenge gender roles and gender norms that are still deeply ingrained in our society. Just because you don't fit into traditional gender roles, you should be considered an outcast by society. As McQuillan and Pfeiffer state in their article, if boys and girls are essentially different, why is it so hard for Anne to do femininity? Anne would, no doubt, blame her red hair. We can only celebrate the fact that her struggles, like her dizzying language, forces us to see the world around us from a new perspective. Throughout Anne of Green Gables and the rest of the books in the series, Anne learns to accept who she is, which is inherently feminist. And just because certain parts of this book are a bit dated doesn't mean that it shouldn't be read. As Maria Barocaz states, Montgomery's writing is current even today. Anne is shown to find friends and acceptance even in her unfashionable clothes. Anne's individual agency gives a powerful role to 21st century readers. Anne of Green Gables is a celebration of girlhood. To quote Hinshaw, Montgomery's celebration of the changes girls experience as they become women provides her readers with examples, rich in their variation, of fulfilling performances of gender. Anne of Green Gables has been influential for decades, and I hope it continues to be influential and continues to have an impact on feminist literature. Like I stated in the introduction, there have been countless adaptations made centered around Anne. First, there was a silent film made in 1919 with 3 other films following. There have been radio productions, stage productions, animated series, comics, web productions, and plenty of live-action television shows, with the 2 most famous being the miniseries made by CBC that originally came out in 1985 and was then followed by 3 sequel miniseries and then a prequel miniseries. And then Anne with an E, which ran from 2017 to 2019 and was a joint CBC and Netflix production. And personally my favorite, I miss it, it shouldn't have been canceled. All of these adaptations of Anne of Green Gables can be viewed through a feminist lens, with the most blatant feminist adaptation being Anne with an E. Anne of Green Gables is an inspiring story of girlhood and how important it is to embrace who you are. The classic childhood story is extremely feminist, and I am so grateful to have a character like Anne Shirley to look up to. I hope you all enjoyed this long video essay analyzing Anne of Green Gables from a feminist theory lens. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.
There will come a soldier who carries a mighty sword. He will tear your city down.